square my shoulders on so she can give me a good side.
Ready? Hi, my name is Paulette Clark, and I'm a student in Special Topics. And today I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Robert Nettles, retired Army captain. And some of my questions for him today was kind of a little bit different than the other people that I had interviewed in the past. So the first question I had for Mr. Nettles was, what were some of the stresses that he encountered while being in the U.S. Army? And Mr. Nettles is going to reply.
There were many stresses, some more specifically pertaining to being out in the world alone. At that time, I was 18 years old. My first tour was 3 years. I was in the Pacific. We had several missions around the Pacific Rim, and they were all isolated situations where when you did have time, the only thing you would be able to do was write a letter. Of course, they didn't have email back in those days.
Okay. All right. So that's some of the things that Mr. Nettles encountered while he was in the U.S. Army. And my other question to him was, what was his support back then? And of course, he said that they didn't have emails or any type of social media at that time, so their form of communication was in a letter. So Mr. Nettles' reply to me was?
Yeah, you did have what they call a phone station. Mm-hmm. Say, for instance, Sprint or AT&T would set up a booth, and you could go into the booth and make a call. Being on that side of the world, 9 times out of 10, if you made a call home, you might only get one person, and of course, you had about 2,000 people outside. Wow. Wanted to make a call also, so they put you on a time clock and you would be able to make a call. And it got fancy. They got you on, they got the calling cards. Mm-hmm. And so they would issue everybody a calling card, and you could talk as much as the calling card would allow. But it was socially, isolated. You have people from many cultures, and then being from New Orleans, you want some cayenne pepper in your food,
Right,
so
right.
There were a lot of things that, took away from you being who you were. And so you just had to concentrate on your job, which, in many ways brings you back home, once you do your job.
And another thing I wanted to ask you was, how many years did you spend all together in the U.S. Army?
20.
20 years. So he's retired now. So what I wanted to ask Mr. Nettles was, if he had to re-enlist all over again, what would he do differently?
Initially, I went in under the cohort program, and what that is you get a bunch of your friends who are interested in going into the service, and it's a bargaining package where you get more of what you want, mm-hmm. and the services get what they want. In this particular case, we had what they call a sweetheart deal, where we all went to the same location, mm-hmm. on the first part of our service career. In that cohort packet, you don't get the best job, but you get the best locations with the people you go in with. Okay. At that time, my job was artillery, and it may not seem like a whole lot, but it's incredibly big in terms of what it encompasses and what you have to learn. In that you're in a cohort, everything you do and everywhere you go, you have to be certified, expert. Otherwise, you get washed out of the cohort, and then you go back into the individual replacement system, which means if I, say for instance, I'm gonna make a different choice and I'll go somewhere alone, you don't get to choose where you wanna go, mm-hmm. and you may be selected to do, you may select to do a skill or have a certain job, but then they tell you where you're gonna go and do that job.
Okay.
So the only thing you can say at one point is what you're secure with. I wanted to be secure in the location, but going back in, I wish I would be able to do the same thing and secure a location at that level. At the lower ranks, a job is a job, you get the same pay. Of course, at the higher ranks, you want a different job because you want to be able to take that into a career field. For instance, if you go in the medical side, you want to rise up in your medical profession until you can become a skilled healthcare provider rather than just a technician. So throughout your career, you want to do the things you can do to progress in your career. And that's basically how I did it, except in the medical field. On the second half of my career, I did the medical professional administrative task that led up to me being a medical administrator rather than a technician. So I sort of got that wish later on, but then I think I would do the same thing earlier on, so that the majority of my years would be spent signing papers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one more question, and I just want to know now, what are your thoughts about the military and with Donald Trump being our president? How do you feel about it?
Regardless of what president is in, the military is going to be responsible for a lot. The second part of my career, being that I was an administrator more so, we still had a lot of places we had to be. Let me say, like the Fukushima with Japan, you have Honduras and what we call third world countries, and now you have AFRICOM, they call it AFRICOM. And so what you do in that instance is you go to those locations and you set up, Donald Trump does not call it nation building. He doesn't want to do that.
Okay.
But you still have to establish a presence. We used to have huge cities almost in places like Germany and portions of West Asia. Those locations are scaling back, but then they're scaling up in places where we've traditionally not have gone, but we need to be there because China and Russia are coming through. Well, regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or someone else, America still has an interest, business interest.
Okay.
And in order to protect those business interests, you have to have a military presence around to create stability, like in the Middle East. Although there's a lot of things going on, we're still there, and we're going back in larger numbers to create more stability because there's a second wind to oil. And oil production is another key in big business, and they just sold more oil leases. So that means we're going to be exporting more oil. If you pull the military back, even if you're a rich man like Donald Trump or whatever conservative, you're going to feel like, I need to make sure this oil shipment gets to where it's going so we can make all that money, because he's trying to beat the deficit down so that we will have more export than import. Well, if there's no military, it may not make it because they have a lot of piracy overseas and those sort of issues. So he may have a lot of rhetoric in what he's saying, and it may seem like, oh, my child is going overseas and they're going to be in danger. As you can see in America, children are in danger everywhere, in every level of school. So we want to make sure that there's a military presence overseas and there's diligence here, and we're aware of everything. And doesn't matter if it's Trump or not.
Okay. Okay. So very good. I enjoyed that conversation with you. It taught me a little bit more about the military, and then it makes me also feel comfortable in the last question that I asked you, as it relates to people being deployed, that we could feel a little bit safer, to even think about it in that mindset, whether they're here or whether they overseas fighting for our country. If something's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. So I think
let me add one point. We have children, our loved ones, our little youth. There are not that many opportunities, and companies are not giving retirements. The military is giving retirement and money for school.
Okay.
So that's a huge consideration. And basically, if you work smartly and work well, you can tour the world and come back and afford college without having to college debt and the loans and things like that, so that's a big consideration.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Nettles. You have enlightened me, and I thank you for your time, and thank you for serving our country.